Hi everyone, and welcome back to Project No Buy. In today's video, I'm going to be answering some of your questions as kind of a 10,000 subscriber special. So I made a community post a couple of weeks ago to collect any questions and possibly anything you wanted to be de-influenced from. And now I think only one person had anything with a de-influencing request. And I'm going to be starting with that kind of question, de-influencing first, and then I'll move into the rest of the questions. So this first question, let me pull it up so I don't misquote somebody. Here's a personal question. Do you write or like to write? You're so well spoken, so I imagine you'd be well written too. That's very flattering, thank you. As far as de-influencing, I'm on a no-buy for the next few months, so haven't allowed myself into even the slightest thought of wanting anything. But maybe, is it possible to de-influence a travel bug? Do I even want you to? Yeah, so, okay. Do I write or like to write? I used to like to write, and I used to fantasize about writing a book someday. Ideally, it would be fiction. So I am not a writer. I had never studied anything related to writing, but I used to want to be a writer of novels. And I'm not, never say never. I'm not currently working on anything like that, but it would be something that would be nice to maybe pick up as a fun hobby, maybe take a class or something like that as far as, how to structure writing books, how to structure working on ideas and constructing characters and thoughts like that. But I don't foresee being able to do that in the near future. And, that's okay. It's not a burning desire either. I don't know that I would be very good at it. I don't know that I wouldn't be either. So, never know until you try, I guess. But I'm just not sure whether I have, I'm not overflowing with ideas for the type of writing that I would like to do. And I am currently reading a bunch of books about no-buys, actually. I've got 3 or 4 books about other people's no-buy years, no-buy journeys, and I have had a couple of comments about maybe how I should write a book about a no-buy as well, or kind of deconstructing these consumer ideas. And I'm not sure that I could write something better than what's already out there, and whether that's necessary. It would become another thing to, unless I could release it for free, maybe like a PDF version or something like that, it would become another thing to buy. And that kind of does, in a way, like defeat the purpose of being on a no-buy or like perpetuating being on a no-buy. So yeah, I don't know where that's going to go. I don't know if I will ever write any kind of fiction projects or not, but I used to really want to. I used to think that perhaps I would be a writer when I grew up before I decided to just lean into being a musician, and that's where I am now. De-influencing a travel bug. I jokingly want to say that maybe the best thing to do to de-influence travel is to have a bunch of kids, because that makes travel a lot more difficult. But obviously that's not a serious suggestion. And, people still do travel with kids, and it could be a great experience for a family and for everybody involved. But I do find that maybe it's the older I get, but there are a lot of inconveniences that come with traveling as well. Maybe it's also because I don't quite have the means to pay for the most comfortable and convenient method of travel. So usually if we travel, it ends up meaning we wake up at 4 a.m. to take an early flight. We don't stay in a super nice hotel. We don't have, nice airplane seats or anything, no matter how long the flight is. And it used to be even more difficult when I was on a more strict vegan plant-based diet and, going in the airport trying to find food, and sometimes trying to find food quickly between connecting flights, and how overpriced it is, and how much transport can cost. And again, when you have other people you're taking with you, kids especially, it'll involve sometimes having car seats or trying to wrangle everybody on a bus. And, there are a lot more, for me at least currently, and this may not apply to you, so this could be totally ineffective in de-influencing you in your specific situation. But I'll get to more reasons. But anyway, for me currently, I don't really have the travel bug because I am kind of waiting for the point where everybody's more independent, and also we hopefully are able to save enough money that we can not get the 5 a.m. flight, maybe get something at, a nice civil hour, 10 a.m. or later, and, not getting too late in the other extreme of the day either. And even for auditions, which I do fairly regularly, 2 or 3 times a year, I will sometimes end up with the not ideally timed flight, even though it's just me going, and it does make it easier, but it also doesn't necessarily mean it's the most comfortable experience, if that makes sense. Now, going on to the practical reasons. I think if we can become content and happy in our kind of everyday life, then traveling becomes less of a flashy, attractive, like must-do activity. I know when I was younger, in my 20s, early 20s, it was a really attractive and kind of shiny activity, you know, shiny, sparkly, ooh, I want to do that kind of, aspirational thing that I wanted to do a lot of. I wanted to see the world. When I was in my master's degree, I had a roommate who used to play on the cruise ships. So she was a musician like me. She played the viola. And she, before starting her master's, had spent, 4 months on a cruise ship and had traveled through the Mediterranean. She did a lot more of that. She'd gone through the Mediterranean. I think she might have done the Caribbean as well. And I think she did one to Antarctica, South America, Antarctica, Easter Island. Yeah, I think that was another one. But yeah, she got to travel the world essentially and get paid for it, which seemed like the dream. I actually also applied to play for the cruise company, but I was not accepted. And, there's all sorts of things we don't know about what they're looking for as far as the group of classical musicians. But anyway, no hard feelings. I did actually get to stay as a guest on one of her cruises in the Mediterranean, and that was a really nice experience. So I have traveled a little bit. I've been to Europe that time and one other time to go to a viola congress, actually, where I was performing in the Netherlands. And then having lived in New Zealand, I used to live there, so I've been there, and then have been to conferences in Australia through living there when I was in school. I think the most recent international trip I've taken was to South America with my husband before we had any kids. And that's pretty much it. We've done Mexico and Canada as well. I actually don't like it when people say, oh, I've done this country, because that's kind of a weird way of putting it. So I've been to Mexico and Canada at various points, but we always travel very cheaply. Actually, those Mexico and Canada were solo trips, so getting into the weeds here. But yeah, always traveling very cheaply, usually staying in hostels, oftentimes with the shared rooms, with bunk beds and not really knowing who else is going to be there. But it's always been fun. It's always been like a perspective opening experience, especially the countries that speak a different language. And this is not exactly a de-influencing part, is it? I guess going back to the de-influencing, part of the reason that I did the travel that I did back when I did it was, I think, my stage of life where it was much more unsettled. I had not settled into any of my salaried jobs yet that I've had. I was kind of not as financially stable, and I guess not as mentally stable either. They don't necessarily correlate, but I was not settled in my mind either. So I was looking for more areas of chasing contentment, I guess, chasing excitement, chasing adventure, chasing different and change and all of those things. And now, even though I live in a fairly non-aspirational place, I feel much less impetus to go and see something new and different because I have more contentment in myself and in my everyday life. So I can appreciate the simple things a lot more easily. The cup of coffee, the family that I have, the connections I have with the people that live in my house, that don't have any choice but to interact with me. It's not even that I have a ton of friends or a big social network here, which, that would also help probably as far as de-influencing the need to travel bug. And hopefully the longer I'm here, I will develop a more and more robust social network. And I don't know that there's anything wrong with occasional travel either. So, I'm not necessarily de-influencing travel full stop, but I guess travel for arbitrary reasons, just because you think you should, is something that I would de-influence, I guess. And, there's nothing wrong with a carefully considered and budgeted for and planned for impact minimization trip every now and then. So this is maybe the worst de-influencing video ever. Perhaps it's a good thing that the other comments only offered questions, because maybe I'm just being exposed as not really knowing what I'm doing as far as de-influencing. I do think that it would be easier to de-influence a specific object though, so throwing travel at me is kind of a difficult one to do right away. So go forth, save and budget and plan for your trips to try to not cause negative impact to the places you visit. And, go forth and travel reasonably. Okay, getting on to the other questions. I would love to know if you found a good way to politely refuse items you know you will never use. Yes and no. So I think I've set fairly strong systems in my life for not having gifts given to me. So my family in general don't really do gifts for birthdays or Christmas, except the immediate family. So like my husband and I and our kids, like the little kids. So other than that, we don't even really do gifts for in-laws or birthdays. You know, they don't really do birthdays. We just have cake and take them out for a meal. My friends, I guess, don't really do gifts either. If I'm around for the birthday of a friend, I tend to give them a food item, a snack that might be from a world market. So it might be something that I used to have in New Zealand, and it's always going to be consumable, right? It's always going to be a small, like less than $5 consumable snack. And I don't expect their favor in return, right? So I have had very few instances in the past, I don't know how many years, 4 or 5 years, where I've actually had to refuse anything or been presented with anything that I would not use, put it that way. I guess the sticky situations are when my mom comes to visit and she does bring things that I will not use, and we've gotten a lot better at communicating about this, and she will just take it back. So we've set that precedent through conversations before. So I guess it really depends on how close the person is to you. If it's somebody in your immediate family, like your mom or a relative, perhaps you can talk to them when it's not a gift-giving occasion and just raise the idea of, hey, you know, we're trying to not do gifts anymore, and we really have a strong desire to simplify our lives, not have excess stuff. And therefore, you know, next time gifts are involved, if it's something that we really can't use, I might not be able to take it. So, you know, let's consider that and keep it respectful, obviously. And if you have people that really won't take no, or, you know, people who are not close enough perhaps to have that discussion with, we do have neighbors who brought us a tin of Christmas goodies, you know, sweets, cookies, which was fine because they were consumable. But if they were to bring a material item and, you know, leave it at our doorstep, or ring our doorbell and try to give it to us, that would probably not be a situation where I would try to politely refuse, just because it does seem to be more connection compromising than it's worth, right? I don't want to compromise the level of connection I have with my neighbor. So I would probably just kindly accept and not feel bad about donating it later or trying to rehome it, trying to regift it. Ideally as well, if it's a gift from somebody who's not that close, it will be something more generic, right? This is also kind of putting a lot of stock into the gift giver, right? So I'm assuming, making assumptions that may not be true, that if somebody like a neighbor or a coworker or somebody who doesn't know your inner workings intimately gives you a gift, that it will be more surface level and therefore more regiftable. And it's not that we're trying to pass around a bunch of junk, right? But it does feel like if somebody gives you something like a candle or something that you really just don't want, you would be able to regift that to somebody. And, you know, hopefully somebody that actually likes the thing, right? Like I said, we're not just trying to shift junk and be like, oh, let me just push this onto somebody else. But it does feel like hopefully it would have an opportunity to go to somebody who actually likes it. You could even put it up for free on Facebook Marketplace or the Neighbors app or whatever. Free kind of, maybe, you know, if your neighbor gave it to you, don't put it on the Neighbors app, but you know what I mean? Like there are ways to see if anybody you know wants it for free or just donate it. I know it's not ideal, but if there's a situation where the relationship will be compromised, and, you know, given that I'm learning more and more that human connection is what brings happiness and fulfillment, and we don't want to compromise the human connection, even, or especially based on stuff, right? Like, I think that's the other element of the no-buy and trying to detach from consumerism and stuff. Like, yes, we don't want to bring things into our lives, but I also don't want to be ruled by stuff coming into my life and kind of having to obsess over how to prevent that either. You know what I mean? So this might not be the answer you're looking for, but to summarize, if it's somebody close enough to you who would actually be trying to shop for you, then hopefully you can have a respectful conversation and say, look, we're trying to detach from gifts. Can we go out to a meal together? Can we do something together? Can we share the gift of time instead? And otherwise, you know, feel free, if you can't resist the gift, just know that if I really don't have a use for it, I will be giving it back to you. So you can shop with that in mind, and if they get something that they would like to keep for themselves, then all right, great. And then the second option of them not being close to you, maybe just don't stress about it. And if the worst case comes and you have to donate it, then do so guilt-free, knowing that you did everything within your control, or that you can't control other people, but you also don't want to compromise the connection you have with that person. I guess it does also depend on the item too. So if it does seem like it's a more kind kind of generic gifting situation, like if somebody at work is handing out gifts to all of their coworkers, I think that's an easier situation to politely refuse, right? To say, oh no, thank you, we're at capacity in our household right now, but thank you so much for the thought, So it really does depend on the situation. And again, sorry to kind of waffle on about the various different scenarios here, but I think it does make a lot of difference as to how it's presented, right? What kind of setting, if it's a birthday or if it's a holiday or if it's something more personal versus more general, right? That's kind of the spectrum here. Maybe we'll follow up on this next holiday season. Okay, moving on to the next question, or we're going to be here all day. You may have touched on this in previous videos, but was there a certain moment or experience that caused you to be pushed towards the no-buy, anti-consumerist mindset? What was the catalyst for the change in your lifestyle? So I had attempted to do no-buys for a long time. And I got the idea, I think, from Hannah Louise Poston on YouTube back in 2018 when she did her no-buy year. I've since kind of talked about how I don't watch her content anymore, and no hard feelings or anything like that. She doesn't know who I am. But I guess that was kind of my first inspiration for the challenge. And since knowing about it, I had thought on and off like, oh, maybe I should do that too. But I didn't really have the kind of shopping problem that made it imperative until, I think, years later, 2022, 2023, and it became something that was negatively impacting my life in those years. So not only had we just moved to the city where we currently live, we were also saving for a house and then eventually bought a house. And so we did have another place for our money. We started a new job, my husband did, and I guess I did too, but we moved here for his job and expanded our family. So there were lots of life stressors and I was just shopping too much. And it was getting to the point where I was kind of trying to sneakily do it a little bit. So kind of try to make sure my husband wasn't seeing all of the packages that were coming in. And, I wasn't doing anything totally nefarious, but, we share finances. So he had access to all of our statements and things, but he's not generally the kind of person that goes over things with a fine-tooth comb. So I was able to kind of slide a lot of it under the rug. And that was just starting to feel really icky. And then I did, right before the 2024 no-buy year, I did kind of have I don't know that it was a single moment, but I was realizing that it was getting out of hand. The ball was rolling and rolling faster, and the kind of Christmas birthday haul for 2024 was just too much. And I was buying a lot of, I had already amassed a collection of the handbags that I really enjoy so much. And I currently have more than any person needs as far as handbags go. And, I've already talked about it, so I'm not going to go back into the details here. And it's not wrong on principle to have collections of things. And I'm going to talk about that in the future video as well. So we're going to get there. Not necessarily wrong. It might be wrong in some ways, but anyway. But I don't think there was just one moment, because I have talked about it on here as well before, but I had started the Conscious Consumerism YouTube channel in 2020, I believe, with my husband. We had a joint project, and we tried to go on a no-buy year that year too, or I did. He was very much not on board. And that quickly failed and quickly continued to keep failing, right? So the documenting it on YouTube was not really helping. My husband was editing the videos as well, which maybe didn't help. It was kind of harder for me to be honest, I guess, harder to get vulnerable, knowing that I wouldn't be the one reviewing it later. So this, I guess, 2024 project of Conscious Consumerism, now Project No Buy, is what started the actual commitment to the No Buy Challenge, which I know wasn't exactly your question, but basically to answer the question again, going back to what I said first, 2022 and 2023, after we moved to the new city, was when I realized that things were getting out of hand. And I'd always kind of had a slow flow of shopping before, just at various price points, various levels. There were years that I had almost no money, no extra money aside from living expenses, and sometimes had to scrape by with groceries and things like that. And those were years that were not problematic as far as not being able to buy anything. And then when I started making more money, I started also kind of, there were necessary purchases like being able to dress for the job with a dress code and etc. But it just kind of crept up, I guess. And then when the big life changes happened, it really did get out of hand. And so now we're more settled in our location, in our jobs, and in my Project No Buy now. So here we are.
Upon editing reflection, I have a better answer. I had reached a point of intense loneliness and unhappiness after our move and after lifestyle changes like having kids and losing all my friends. I basically had to forge a new identity and was finding solace through shopping for that, but I could feel that it wasn't working at all and it wasn't healthy for every other aspect of life.
All right, the next comment is not a question actually, but they shared that they love that I'm a mom because they're also a mom and love being able to work part-time. The ultimate motivation is being home with their kids more, and I love that. It's the same. I would love to spend more quality time with my kids too, give them my full attention for more of my time. Congrats on 10K. Thank you. I actually don't really believe it, to be honest, as far as the numbers game goes. It's hard to conceptualize that many people have seen me speak and decided to stick around. Okay, I've been wondering how you handle household purchases, things your spouse wants that fall into a category of shared things. Pretty good at cutting myself off, but can't say no to my spouse. Luckily, he doesn't want much, but still. Yes, so this is actually a point of minor contention. We used to have a miscellaneous category in our budget that was supposed to cover things that we wanted, and the miscellaneous budget was never able to stick to what we planned. And it would just kind of go up the more we would buy. And, this is both of us. So after my no-buy year last year, which I kept the same system for because I naively thought like, oh, it's a no-buy, I'll be spending $0. So my miscellaneous contribution will be zero, which was not the case. As you know, I did a video of everything I bought during my no-buy year, and I spread that over the year, would have been about $300. Yeah, it would have been about $300 a month that I spent. And this year my goal is to get that to $200 a month for the year. So it doesn't have to be evenly spaced, but that is my goal for my personal miscellaneous budget. And that's based on my income. I want to stick to about 10% of my income for kind of fun money, fun purchasing. And I might actually make more this past calendar year and this current calendar year, in which case I don't really want to adjust my fun spending above $200 a month, but it's not totally impossible that I might get like a Christmas bonus if I earned more money, and therefore 10% would be higher. I don't know, I'm still kind of working through that. It's still January, so we'll wait and see. My husband also has a miscellaneous fun money line, and he does get a higher one because he earns more. We talked about this, and he actually said that that's not fair and that we should just have the same amount. It doesn't matter who earns more, and I do work at home and whatever, support the family. However, I was the one who said I don't want to operate like that because I want to detach from wanting material things, and I am kind of motivated to stick to my challenge. And, although we do combine finances, I want to see what would happen working on my own financial resources, right? Obviously, this is all hypothetical. I did do a budget video, I think recently, where I showed what it would look like if I was operating on just my own income. And, ends don't quite meet if I want to save as much as I do. So, it is hypothetical. I don't make quite as much money as my hypothetical budget shows, but that's kind of my mentality, right? That's how I want to be allocating my money. And so that's why I don't want to accept a higher level of fun money, even though if we shared things evenly down the middle, it would be higher. And so my husband does have a higher line. Now, we are still trying to save an emergency fund, so we're both trying not to kind of max out our fun money, although we are also trying to save in a mindful way too. So we have savings lines, for retirement and for emergency fund. So the number one goal is to try to adhere to the savings budget, right? So if we manage to actually put that money where we say we're going to put it, that's number one. And then trying to stick to under our monthly fun budget allowance, right? And I am not really at liberty to share 100% of our financial details online, so I can't really go into what my husband's budget is and etc. But he does also have an expensive hobby right now as far as running marathons, and it's expensive because he does physical therapy every week and has a coach doing his running plans. And we might even currently be in Houston for the Houston Marathon, which he was running in January. And, the repeated shoe purchases because he puts miles on his shoes really fast, so he needs to replace them. And he likes these kind of, what are they? Endorphin speeds or whatever that are over $200. So, he's got a fairly expensive hobby that does take up a lot of his fun money anyway, but it is also like a health hobby. So, you can't really say no to somebody wanting to do something that improves their body and mind and all that. So we might go more into that as the year progresses with budgets and hobbies and other chats as well. So how do I handle household purchases? Well, we have our own miscellaneous budget lines based on our incomes, and you and your spouse might want to have even budget lines for that. It doesn't have to be the way I'm doing it because I'm on a personal no-buy journey and a personal journey to detach from consuming. And I would also say that the things that I want are truly non-essential, whereas the things that he wants are a balance of, health improving slash non-essential, but he kind of wants fewer things that are more expensive, if that makes sense. Like a lot of guy stereotypes, I guess. Like the toys he wants tend to be more expensive, like car parts or etc. for the car that he works on in the garage. So yeah, you can think about whether doing it based on budget like that works for you as well, if he's not on board with the kind of no-buy, detaching from consumerism mentality. The next question is, I would love to know your thoughts and strategies on overcoming the guilt of failing. Even though I'm back on track, I can't shake it. And I did already comment on this one because I didn't want to leave this person hanging in the possible guilt of failure. So my comment here was, you didn't fail, you learned. You gathered valuable information, and this is a moment of growth and observation. So like I shared last year, when you do this kind of a challenge, what it does is it makes you both into the observer and the actor. So you have the ability, I guess, metacognition, to respond to your own actions and to reflect and to react and to plan. And so you can course correct and do this in a loving and non-judgmental way. Or if it's not loving, you can do it in an observational kind of scientific way, right? Like you're the one in the lab coat looking at the lab rat saying, okay, so the rat failed and, did this thing that we didn't want them to do. But is there something we can do, change their environment so that they're less likely to do that again? And you're not mad at the rat, right? The rat's just being a rat and living life. And you might have even expected the rat to do what it did, but now you learned. You can see why you might have done that and how the situations led up to that, or what factors led you to make the purchase you made. And, maybe you can still even enjoy and use the purchase you made. It's not like you have to feel guilty even associated with the item that you ended up acquiring. But I think, at least if you want to commit to the no-buy, you do have to reflect and you do have to change something for the next time that situation might come up, right? Because you don't want it to keep happening again and again. So make a change, do some journaling, do some reflection, make sure you understand why it happened, and put some measures in place, I guess. If you can pinpoint like, okay, maybe I just need to not see that again. If it was an ad online or if it was going to a store, just don't do that again. Or if you do, take someone with you, have a list, have different kind of accountability measures maybe. Maybe you have to send somebody a message after you get out to say that you only got what was on your list. Maybe you can avoid the section if you were in a section of the store that was not somewhere you really needed to be. And, it depends what the circumstances were, right? So try not to have the exposure you had that led you to make the purchase you made, I guess. Eliminate the see it. I've talked about that before, the see it, want it, buy it cycle. So if you can eliminate seeing it, and then if you find yourself wanting it, are there other measures you can put in place, right? Can you journal about the item, whether you actually want it or whether you just want to want it, whether you want that high in your brain, right? The dopamine release of any purchase, whether you actually see yourself using the item in 5 years. Some people, I've got a comments that some people draw a picture of the item and then they can kind of get it out of their system and look at it from that perspective. Some people make themselves wait. I don't do a wish list and wait, but I certainly do support the idea of waiting, right? You can have your mental unofficial wish list, right? Because even if you don't use a wish list, sometimes there will be things that float around in your mind because you just can't get them off of your mind. I'm still working on that part myself, right? The idea is to want something but be able to let it go, and eventually maybe even not want these things in the first place. But if I want something, I don't want to elevate it on a wish list. I want to be able to release it from my mind. But if that's proving to be challenging, making yourself wait a certain period of time to kind of try to decrease the force of that desire on you. And I guess I'm kind of veering off the course of the original question, right? Which is how to not feel guilty. I think focus on the path of learning, right? The fact that you are observing and growing and learning from your experiences. And that is kind of the answer. We don't feel guilty for learning or for making a mistake when we're trying to learn something new, right? So don't feel guilty for failing on a no-buy, even though there are metrics of guilt, I guess, that I use personally to try to deter purchasing. So by that I mean, when I do find myself wanting things, it is kind of weighing up, like, if I truly don't need this and I keep buying things anyway, it's not good for the environment, it's not good for resource use, it's not good for my finances, it's not good for so many things. And I could, in theory, feel guilty about that, right? My environmental impact, my financial waste, things like that. But it's not necessarily guilt that is making those factors deterrents for purchasing new things, if that makes sense. I can be aware of those things, but not have the emotional response of guilt, but use it kind of as a more scientific, I guess, dare I say logical. And I'm not trying to imply that your feelings are not logical, but it's just the setup, I guess, the mental setup of, okay, I know these things, I'm going to use these facts to not want or act on the want the next time and see which kind of points speak to me the most when I'm next in that situation of maybe wanting to buy something that I don't really think that I need. If all of that fails and you do still feel the guilt and shame and whatever, then go ahead and allow yourself to feel it, but try not to stay there, I guess is my final piece of advice there, right? It's normal to feel all of these emotions, and I don't think we need to be fighting it all the time. I think we can say, okay, I do feel guilty about this, but it's not really serving me to continue to feel guilty about this. So therefore, I'm going to try to move on, and when this comes back up, treat it lightly and observe it, and, I'm not going to fight with it and tell it to go away, but, oh, I do feel guilty about that again. Okay, well, let's move on with the day. Like, acknowledged, I see you, but you're not serving me, and I'm going to go do whatever I was going to do next. So that's kind of my other kind of antidote for emotions, for feelings, is just to feel them a little bit and try not to let it take over your life, I guess. Okay, I had another comment here sharing a guided meditation. So that was cool. It's called "You Do Not Need to Buy Anything Today" meditation. You are enough. From the channel, already enough. So just shouting that out here. Okay, what kinds of hobbies do you have outside of work and YouTube? Do you have to talk yourself out of trying new hobbies because of the no-buy? So what hobbies do I have? Well, similarly to the question about travel earlier, when you have a bunch of kids, you kind of temporarily put hobbies on hold, except for perhaps the most essential ones. And for me, work kind of is crossing over into my hobby. So I play the viola for my job. And YouTube, I guess, is an income-generating hobby. So those are kind of my two biggest hobbies / sources of income. And, that's kind of maybe not how some people would prefer to do it, where their hobby or thing that they love to do is also their source of income. But I think many people do, right? So I would hypothesize that many people, like hairstylists, cake decorators, even people who do building things, right, construction workers, have maybe turned a hobby into a job. So I'm not going to get too far into that, I guess. So long story short, my viola playing, especially the loop covers that I do kind of on the side, right? That's nothing related to work, but loop covers, even doing auditions for other orchestras, I guess, in some ways you could, it's definitely not a hobby in that I'm doing it for fun, but it's not really related to my job directly. So I don't know, you could consider that a kind of emotional roller coaster hobby of training and going and trying to get a better job and getting rejected and etc. Anyway, so viola, YouTube has been a big hobby, I guess, this kind of video journaling. And I used to do scrapbooking and sometimes do like other crafts like crochet, knitting, things like that. That's all kind of gone out the window, been put on the long-term back burner. I still have everything I need to do. So if I were to try to crochet a sweater or something, or knit a sweater, I wouldn't have the yarn or anything. I don't have any of that, but it's definitely not the right time. So I've not had to talk myself out of making any purchases because it's simply not on the radar for the next, it's not for 2025, certainly, probably not until, 2030 or something like that. And you never know, but it's not in the imminent future that I'm going to legitimately have time to sit down and make anything. I do still have scrapbooking supplies, so I have enough to get on with if I did have the time to probably make a whole other scrapbook. I was following tutorials where you make the actual book as well, so like you do cardboard and you cover it in paper and you decorate it and all that. So it's not like the paste and stick kind of scrapbooking, it's like the paper crafts where you make the whole book and then you have like the folding things that kind of, maybe I'll show it on the channel sometime if there's interest. Probably not. Comment down below if you want to see my scrapbook. I have one completed one. But yeah, I still have the things that would be necessary to make probably a whole other scrapbook. I kind of started the exterior of one and then had a bunch of kids, and that was it. So I used to scrapbook while I listened to the show Till Debt Do Us Part while we were trying to get out of debt. So that was one of my kind of favorite things to do on an evening where I was done with work or whatever. Is just set the dining table with all of my papers and scissors and whatever, and scrapbook while I had that show playing in the background. Now, I do actually hope to start some exercise, and I actually suspect that it would be maybe a little more effective if I were to invest in a class or something like that. So that, if I do start in 2025, will be part of my fun budget. So $200 a month. And I'd probably start slow if I did anything like that. So it would certainly not be more than once a week. And I could reevaluate the budget if it was really adding a lot to my life, but kind of crimping my other, the fun budget includes meals when I'm out at work as well. So if there's a 2-service day, my dinner or whatever with my work colleagues will come out of that budget because it's not a family restaurant meal. And our restaurant budget is for family takeout or restaurant experiences. And same goes for my husband, right? His meals, if he gets something at work, will come out of his own personal budget because that's a choice. We can bring food from home. So anyway, that's kind of the last words on possible hobby spending during a no-buy. Another comment here, 2 weeks into my no-buy, and I'm sort of shocked at how much I've spent so far. There are 2 birthdays in January, but still, it's really made me think about where my money is going. Yeah, previously I would have just paid out and thought nothing of it. So this is something that does happen when you start a journey of no-buy. You're like, whoa, this is forcing me to take stock of what's actually happening here. And I do hope or suspect that the birthdays play a big part in it. If you have not seen already how I'm starting this year, this no-buy year, with a buy month. And I talked about this in my no-buy rules, where I wanted at least 6 months of the year to be complete no-buy, because 4 or 5 months last year were complete no-buy, and I want to kind of increase that. Ideally, it'll be more like 8 months. Or in a perfect scenario, it'll be 10 months, where the only times I buy something will be for birthday and Christmas. So that'll be 2 months of the year. So I guess it was kind of expected to start with January being a buy month, since my birthday is in January. And I do, at least for me, plan to have my budget kind of distributed this way too, where some of it goes out in January and some of it goes out in November, December. So maybe this is the case for you as well, where the birthday times will be the times that your money goes out a little more easily. So don't despair, blame it on the birthdays, and or don't feel obligated to feel bad, I guess, because you were spending on birthdays. You can just be newly aware of it and make decisions based on your experience and newfound awareness this year. Maybe it's true that you do want to cut down on birthday spending and maybe offer other kinds of gifts for people or yourself. Experience gifts, gifts of time, gifts of just spending time together and maybe doing a craft for free. Like I was saying, have been reading books on no-buys, and they're trying to find all these ways around giving gifts that cost money. And so I'll probably do a dedicated video on these books later, so I'll save the details for that. But you can use this information now to plan how it goes in the future, right? And that's the most valuable thing. That's the most valuable part of a no-buy challenge. It doesn't really matter whether you stick to your rules perfectly or not. It does matter that you try, right? It doesn't matter if you succeed. It just matters that you try and that you observe and that you act on what you learn. So those are the TLDR of my whole project, I guess, is that right there. Hi, here's my question. Have you started learning Korean? Alas, no. They mentioned the signs in my setup as well. These are 2 of my kids' names. They're Korean names. They don't go by their Korean names. These are kind of one of their 2 middle names, but that's what these are. And alas, I have not started learning Korean. That's pretty much all I have to say about that. I did do a search as to whether there's a Korean language course at my local universities, and there is not. So that was kind of my first, the easy option, and that is unfortunately not an option. And I have been struggling to find anything local. There might be a church that has a group that meets, but I'm not really sure about that, and I'm also not really a part of any churches, so I'm kind of uncomfortable about the idea of going in there and brazenly being a non-religious person trying to get a Korean class from a Korean church. It's kind of like I'm not filled with confidence about doing that. I also don't have a ton of extra time or ability to leave the house when it's not work related right now. So it's kind of maybe not the right time yet, but I can look into doing maybe more online, or even just listening to either K-dramas if I find a place to access them, or even YouTube videos in Korean could probably help get the juices flowing of hearing the language. You mentioned in another video that growing up, your family were or are Christians, but that you personally do not have a belief in that faith now. How much do you think our values and beliefs when we are younger influence our perspectives in adulthood? Okay, so to answer the second part of the question as a standalone, how much do you think our values and beliefs when we were younger influence our adult perspectives? I think it influences them a huge amount. So Christianity or not, like I think what we learn in childhood really shapes our approach in adulthood. I did a video about what kind of replacements I'm going to need in 2025 and talked about how I use things up really slowly. And I do think that part of the reason that I'm kind of frugal-minded in my use of the products that I have is because of how I grew up, right? How I was taught to save things, not waste things, not go through things too fast, not use excess, kind of try to save money on things like that, try to use what we have and make it last kind of thing. And now that I don't necessarily have to do that, in fact, in some ways I have made it so that I don't have to do that by having too much stuff, I am still in that ingrained habit of not feeling comfortable using more than I need of something. And that's the kind of mentality that was instilled in me in childhood. So that is a belief that, I actually don't think it doesn't serve me either. Let me phrase that without the double negative. I think it does kind of serve me to do as well, right? Like I still don't think it's great to use products excessively or waste things. So like it is something I still think is good, and maybe that's just my childhood, drilled into me since childhood. So I think it's a huge extent of your beliefs in adulthood are shaped in childhood. As far as the religious thing, I don't really know that the path would have been different if my family was not Christian. And, well, it would have been different in that I would probably have never identified as a Christian, whereas when I was a kid and just part of the family, I would have just said, sure, I'm the same religion as my family. But when I was a teenager, still being forced to go to church and go to, what was it? I forget what the group was called, the church group that did the confirmation. But I had to go to that group once a week, and I really hated it, to be honest. Like, they were not really able to answer a lot of my questions in a satisfactory way, just because I was very skeptical even as a teenager. And they didn't really have, I guess another caveat here is that I was in a small town, and not every church is going to be the same, right? So there might be churches that fulfill your needs and answer your questions, even if you have strong beliefs in non-religious kind of sources as well. And again, I don't want to alienate anybody who is a Christian on here or has strong religious beliefs in other religions. It doesn't really, I don't have any less respect for anybody who follows any other religions, but it just wasn't fulfilling or satisfying for me, even as a teenager, still having to go to church and participate in these things that I didn't really have strong belief in my own heart and soul and whatever. So I was very careful making my confirmation statement, not to say that I truly believed or anything like that, even though that's kind of what we were supposed to be doing. I carefully worded it to say, all right, I know religion is there, and Jesus is there and is available to help when I need him, and I know that, and whatever. But I was uncomfortable with that from a young age, and again, I don't want to dwell on this for too long because I don't want to make it seem like I am against it for others if it brings you value in your life. And I do think there is a lot of value in religion, in the community. One of the no-buy books I was reading is actually from a religious perspective, and I thought I would be more turned off by that than I actually was. I actually kind of liked some of the more religious insights that the author was sharing as I'm not sure if he's an actual pastor. I need to go back and read the biography of the author, but as a religious figure of some kind. And I actually enjoyed it much more than I thought I would. So I am very open to receiving wisdom from religion. I'm just not 100% a believer myself. And I don't really know if that would be different if I had not had kind of a more religious upbringing as it were. Hopefully that answered your question. I'm not sure that I fully understood the nuance of what you were asking, but there we go. All right, the next one is, do you think that shopping addiction warps your perception of what is expensive? I know you kind of had that struggle with the $500 jeans, but was there a time where you would have seen that as expensive for jeans? I know quality and design matters with the cost, but I'm curious. So I still think $500 is ludicrously expensive for jeans, but I guess the difference is that it didn't prevent me from actually buying them. And to get precise, the jeans were $430.75, which, I don't like to bring that up every time because I don't want it to seem like I'm saying, oh, they were only $430, so it's okay. But in my mind, it did make a difference because that's $70, right? So like, it is kind of a substantial amount of money to not have spent on the $500 jeans, if that makes sense. So I still kind of nickel and dime even the expensive purchases. And I don't plan to ever buy any pants or other clothing item that expensive ever again. I only have a couple of things that are even near that price point in my life, in my wardrobe. And it's hopefully not going to set a precedent. And the other kind of expensive things I have, I don't think really set a precedent, although I guess I can't really be sure about that because I do have multiple kind of more expensive items in general. So I don't know. Whether I think that shopping addiction warps the perception of what is expensive, I'm not actually sure of it being a shopping addiction being the thing that warps it. But I think for me, it was more seeing other people buying these expensive things, right? So like, let's just take, again, I don't like to bring up brands, but there's a French brand that is very popular, clothing brand, and their clothing is kind of on the expensive side, I would say. So like a shirt might be $120, a sweater might be $130, I don't even know how much pants, shoes, and bags cost because I've never really bought any of those from there. But, a dress might be $200. So these are expensive clothes, right? But there was a time when it seemed like every online influencer was either being sent these clothes or buying them with their own money. And so they would be here on camera showing hauls of this brand of clothing, sometimes 10 pieces of clothing from this company. So, that could be $2,000 worth of clothing right there. And so I was seeing these videos of these people having so many pieces, there'd be bigger collections. There are bigger collections online. I think I've seen a video where somebody has almost every sweater that this company has ever made, which would be multiple thousands of dollars, right? And so by comparison, if I went and had 3 of the brand sweaters, which is, I might have 3 or 4 of them right now. And that's, by comparison, not as crazy looking as what I was seeing online. And so I don't even know if it was the fact that I was getting into a problem of shopping behavior. I don't know that I would ever say I had a shopping addiction, but I was shopping more than I wanted to be. I don't know if it was because of that the price of things was warped. And I do have several dedicated conversations about this prepared for February, so I'm not going to go too deep into it in this question. I'm sorry to leave you hanging, but I feel like this video is getting kind of long already. But I do think that the environment of shopping and the environment of influence online was what warped my perception of price more than my own shopping. Because I think it would have been possible to continue having a shopping problem, but buy things that are only $20 or less, only thrifted, only kind of lower end. I think that could have happened, but because I was watching so much content that was all, buy less but better, curate your closet, hone your personal style, shop for natural fabrics, shop for better, upgrade your life, upgrade your style. That was the messaging I was receiving. And also the awareness now that sustainable clothing is probably going to cost more. And so I'm not necessarily even morally opposed to spending $200 for a sweater anymore. I don't know that it was the shopping that did it or just the information I was consuming and the models I was seeing, the models being the influencers with their huge collections of stuff, making my kind of still large, but I would say kind of the large end for a still normal person. And again, you might disagree. I've done my whole closet collection here for that purpose of like, this is what I'm working with. When I say I have a large closet, this is what I'm saying. You can see, for context. And, I acknowledge that I have more clothing than anybody needs. But as far as what we typically see in the online landscape, right, it's been normalized. So I'm still working on bringing my my wardrobe count down to a more reasonable number as far as use, right? What I can actually use and get the most value from. And again, I'm going to be talking about this ad nauseum for in the next few videos, so I'm going to leave that one there. So yeah, the last part of that question was that this person is trying to reset that part of their brain for themselves. And if I've changed in that way, any tips? The way that I'm trying to change this year is through having the year budget, right? The year-long budget goal of not spending more than $200 a month or $2,400 in a whole calendar year. And so if I do spend $1,000 in January or whatever, you know, in the first half of the year, in the first month of the year, then that leaves $1,400 for the rest of the year. And I'm not super concerned actually if I spend $500 on one thing, as long as I keep the yearly spend under what I hope for it to be. And my yearly spend does include things like meals, like I was saying, for myself when I'm not with my family. And if I want to do exercise paid classes, it'll include that. So I have to kind of keep some monthly running budget. I can't just spend all $2,000 in the first 3 months or whatever and still be able to survive comfortably. Like I would have to start bringing my own food and things like that. So it is kind of more of a budget focus this year. And I do also have that ideal rule of 5 for clothing, you know, the best being 5, better being 10, and good being 15, based on the fact that I still brought in about 30 pieces last year. And a lot of them were secondhand, but I still brought in that many pieces of clothing on what was supposed to be a no-buy year. And I had reasons for that, but, you know, if you want to see that, you can go to that video of everything that I bought. But progress is going to come incrementally for me, clearly. You know, I can't just do a no-buy and do it. But the focus as far as resetting what I think is expensive, I guess my answer is that I don't necessarily care about resetting what I think is expensive, because I'm always going to think that $500 jeans are ridiculous, but it's not always going to stop me from making that purchase. However, I am going to stay under budget this year. That is the #1 goal. And that means if I continue to buy $500 jeans, I would only be able to afford 4 pairs of them. And that sounds ridiculous to my mind. You know, there is a line, right? I can't fathom having more than 1 pair of these jeans, for example. And we'll see if that ever comes up in my future of like wanting another pair of pants that expensive. I don't have any other pants or single clothing pieces actually that are that expensive. So anyway, it keeps on coming back to these ridiculous pants. But I guess to summarize, my advice is to plan your acceptable budget for the year. And there might be more that comes out, right, as the year goes on about recalibrating my price, my acceptable price for an individual item. But given the narratives of sustainable fashion and how if everybody's paid fairly along the way, I'm just not sure that it's productive to cut down my acceptable threshold for individual things as much as it is to focus on not needing to buy anything in the first place, if that makes sense. So it's, you know, not the question of do I buy a $200 sweater or a $20 sweater? It's the question of do I buy any sweater or no sweater? And the preferred option is to buy no sweater most of the time, right? Like 99% of the time to buy no sweater over any sweater at any price point. The last question is kind of specific to where I live. So it's somebody who's going to move to Omaha and seeking ideas for maybe date nights for a couple in their 30s. And I, unfortunately, am probably the worst person to ask for this because, again, having a bunch of kids and having a job and having a couple of hobbies, I guess, means that there's not a whole lot of time. And my husband actually works evenings. So there's 2 nights a week that he's on his weekend. It's not actual weekends, it's Sunday, Monday. And so I guess as far as weekend activities go, we've only got 1 night that there might be a show or something, because that generally doesn't happen on Mondays. And, you know, going to a show is not free or cheap generally. So we actually have not done a lot of activities like that. When we first came to Omaha, we did go to the Durham Museum. We keep a membership to the zoo because we have kids, and we've been to other kind of kid-friendly places. But as far as date nights for couples, you know, walking around the Gene Leakey Mall, I guess, is pretty good. You know, you can maybe get a coffee at Godega. They're open late, so they're one of the coffee shops that you can get a hot drink at and walk around downtown. And, you know, emphasis on the hot drink right now because it's winter, so it's cold. And, you know, that's a nice park area with a nice kind of, if you go all the way down, there's like a little, it's not a lake, it's part of a river, right? And, you know, it's not, I don't want to sound like I'm dumping on my city here, but it's not that nice, but it's nice enough, I guess, to go walk around downtown in that area. The old market, some people like. There's a candy store down there that, again, kids like. And if you're an adult who likes candy, you might like it too. It's kind of charming. Some people like to go to the Fontenelle Forest or the Lauritsen Gardens. Again, we have been there and have only been once, and they're not free places either. So they are ticketed, but, you know, might be nice to visit one time. I don't know that I have other recommendations, to be honest. I think one of the great things about Omaha is that it's a good place to kind of stay home and save money because I'm going to be honest as well, not to be negative about the place where I live, but I think we have managed to lower our restaurant budget because there's not a whole lot of places that we would like to get food from here. So I would rather cook at home the majority of the time. But hey, when you move here, maybe send me an email and we can hang out and we can have free or cheap date night activities at our house or at your, you know, not to invite myself over to your house, the audacity, but, you know, come over for a walk or something and we can make free and cheap date nights happen through human connection. How about that? And that's the best I can offer you. Oh, or tickets to the symphony. I can get you comp tickets for most of the classical shows and some of the more pops shows. Offer stands to anybody who lives in Omaha, or if for some reason you're going to be here. I'm not telling you to travel to Omaha for the Omaha Symphony. Please do not do that. But if you are going to be here for whatever reason and you want to see a show, let me know. I'll get you some comp tickets. My email is in my bio, so the email attached to this account. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop rambling on. That was all the questions I received on that community post. Thank you so much to those of you who asked questions, and hopefully there was some help in my answers, something interesting for you. And thank you all for being here as a part of this Project No Buy community. All right, bye for now, and I will see you in the next one.